So welcome everyone to tonight's coffee chat sessions. And I've got a lovely guest with me tonight, Lou Requena, who is going to introduce herself to you in just a few moments. But tonight we're going to talk to you about trauma and some energy work that Lou does. So if you do have any questions for anybody who's watching live on Facebook, just put your questions in as you go into the comments field. And as anybody joins, I'll let them into the Zoom session so we can have live questions. But don't worry, I've got plenty to keep talking for the full session. So thanks so much for accepting my invitation to come along tonight, Lou. And if you'd just like to introduce yourself and say hello, please.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Lou Requena. Nice to be here. Thank you, Maz, for inviting me.
Okay. And so I just wanted to ask probably a little bit about what you do and maybe some of the problems that the people that you're working with might be experiencing, and sort of, what their lives are like when they're, having these experiences.
Okay, so at the moment, I teach a mixture of Tai Chi and Qigong, and I'm also what I class as a transformational life coach. And I use that term because of my own transformation and the fact that for me, what's really important is to help people move on, move out of trauma, move out of challenges and come out the other side, really, because that's been a lot to do with my journey about being at a point where I wanted to give up, and I almost did, being thankful that I didn't, and I went through the hoops and came out the other side. And it literally was like going through hoops sometimes. So I can sometimes marry those up or teach them separately to companies and to individuals. Now I have had and do have a mixture of clients. So I've worked in some corporate companies doing mainly Tai Chi and Qigong, although that's a passion of mine to move into the coaching realm and bring that all together, especially now with all the issues around mental health and people not being able to manage their emotions, etc. But in the personal field, I mean, at the moment, I'm coaching a young man in his late 20s who came to me because he was experiencing mental health challenges, depression, anxiety. And, I remember at that age myself, male or female, it's quite a crossroads in one's life, those late 20s, because a lot of your friends might be getting married, having children. And if you're not, it's like, which way am I going? And if you see yourself being different. So that's one person, just picking a couple. And funnily enough, a young lady's come to me through LinkedIn, through her mum recently, a young 17-year-old who's also experiencing some trauma in her life while at school with friendships, etc. So I've had a multitude, some people who've come to me when they're grieving and they're not quite sure how to sort of come through that. And basically the foundation really, Maz, a lot of the challenges that I've met with in people have been their ability to know themselves well enough to know who they're being in that moment, that the fact that they can be somebody else, hook into a different part of themselves and overcome. And basically that really, that, their emotions don't define them, that there's more to them than that. So that's it in a nutshell, I think.
Yeah, and that you bring up a really valid point there, which for me was, I suffered, and people who've watched any of my series would have heard me say this when I had my grief and loss expert on a few weeks ago, that my mother's death was quite traumatic. She drowned in a bushfire on our farm, and like you and I have talked about my story previously. And, it's really interesting when you're talking about like trying to find another part of yourself, because I know that for me, I was defining myself as my mother's death for a long time. That was the only existence that I had. And it was almost a case, and I mentioned this on a previous episode, that when I'd talk to people before I'd had counseling and before I'd got through all of the struggle that I was having mentally and emotionally, it was almost like I'd say to people, oh, hello, my name's Marilyn, and my mother died in a bushfire on our farm and drowned in the creek. Like, because that trauma, I didn't recognize that it was traumatic for me. I didn't recognize that I'd suppressed it. I didn't know I was on a road that was going to result in depression and counseling. And I didn't see anything outside of that. I just wanted the world to help me. I guess I was screaming out for help, but I didn't know that I was.
Mm.
So I guess that really links into what you're talking about when people, are kind of locked into one part and have to reach out and try and find another part of themselves.
Absolutely. And I can relate to that for a different reason. For many years, being what I call the ill one in the family, and going through mental health challenges when I was a lot younger, and recurring bouts of depression, I when I look back, I can realize that I too carried that around as if that was the definition of me. And again, as you grow older and you learn different things and you get to know yourself better, you realize in your own consciousness that, what am I doing? It's almost like, as you say, you're shaking someone's hand and saying, oh, I'm Lou, and I get depressed sometimes, and this, that, and the other. And it's almost like you blow the, what is it the saying? You throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's like, well, if you're setting anything up for success, you've just blown it because you've just created chaos.
Yeah. And, it came up when I was talking to Jane on the weekend as well about self-definitions and the language that we use. Like, as a lot of people, I'm supposing that you're working with as well, like they're telling the story and being the victim, and they can't get out of that. Can you? Like, not when you're in a circumstance like that, but because you keep telling the story, you keep reinforcing it.
Absolutely. I mean, I've had a milder incident, let's say today, um, with another part of my business, and something that ought to have happened in a certain way at a certain time and didn't. It's a bit like, turning up for a date and he or she isn't there. But in that moment, it's like, well, what's going on? And letting it define me, but realizing that that's what I was doing, or thinking, oh, well, that's it, why me? And you get into that little bit of victimhood. But because I now know that, doesn't make it any easier sometimes. It's still uncomfortable. But, in the past, I might not have turned up on here. That would have been it. I mean, many years ago now, but that was literally, I was so far down that rabbit hole, as it were, that nothing could really lift me up, because my self-esteem was beneath the floor. And I think when people are feeling like that, it's like now all the talk about mental health, and I'm pleased that people are talking about it. I also slightly get a bit angry because it's taken this for the whole world to realize that actually it can happen to anybody at any time through any circumstance. And, for many moons now, people who've been overworking, overstimulating with whatever it is, are not always in the best health mentally. And that's a fact. But because it's more acceptable, people drinking or taking other substances or working so long or whatever it is for people, it's okay. But now I think people are getting a bit of a shock. I just hope that, it doesn't turn into a bit of a buzzword and, a bit of another tick off the list.
Mm. And actually, you're right there as well. This is, a passion of mine to help in this space as well, certainly in corporate, because a number of the contracts that I've done commercially, I've worked in a place where they do just continually load the pressure onto you, but also they talk this well-being talk, and they really push the well-being in the organization. But when they're pushing down deadlines and you're pushing back saying, I can't, deliver all of this stuff, they don't hear it. They just keep pushing. They don't have that well-being aspect kind of like with them as a handbag accessory kind of thing that they just use all the time. It's almost like, it's up in the cupboard and I'll get it out if it's necessary, rather than I'm just going to
Yeah,
force people and push them to the end. And
absolutely.
yeah, and so that comes along with and so I really want to change that culture in corporate as best as I can as well, because you just
Yeah,
can't work people to the bone like that. They will break.
absolutely. And you're absolutely right. It's like, hearing you say that reminds me, I was in corporate years ago as well, in banking. I remember the stigma around my situation at the time, and sort of facing all of that. And I honestly don't think a great deal has changed sometimes. And, you know, dead on, it's like in that moment, because they have a job to do, unless one of the CEOs or people at the top unfortunately get it, then it's a different ball game. Unless they're too ashamed to sort of admit it and stay at work and go through the challenges. But otherwise they will work you to the end, as you say, and nicely put, that, you know, then they'll get it out of the cupboard and, oh, you need this, but they just miss the signs, because unfortunately we do live in that kind of world, but it really needs to change. And I know we've done a lot of work together in different realms before, and come from a similar place and a similar thinking. And I do believe that, you know, from the CEO down and back up again is where it needs to happen. So, you know, people to work cohesively in corporate, whether it's a big team or a small team, but it needs to include everybody. It's not just there. Even, you know, without the cleaners in a company, nothing would work. So everybody's of equal value. And I remember when I was in the bank and going back to work after an episode, let's call it that. And it was just the most frightening thing. I don't know what was more frightening, having the depression and being off work in the first place, or going back to see people's reactions. And you saying about grief reminds me when I worked conventionally, as I call it, with young people and families at risk. And it was one of the best, hardest and most beautiful pieces of work I've done, actually. And they had big challenges. Now, we were in one side of the office working with the 12 to 17-year-olds. It'd been 13, but it was lowered to 12. And this was some years ago. So now it's probably about 8. And the other side, no, and the other side was 17 to 25, the leaving care side of the office. And this colleague, well, this man who had a big shock, his sister-in-law had died just like that when they were out clubbing. She was just turned 50, and they didn't know that she'd had an aneurysm. So we were told that he had been off for that reason, and he was coming back this particular day. And I didn't know him apart from saying good morning and good evening, but he came back, and, you know, I observed that not one person spoke to him, literally. And I thought, I can't stand this. So I was making a cup of tea or coffee, and I went in to see him, and I said, look, I call him John, I can't remember his name. I said, John, I know we don't know each other, but I just come out with it because I wanted to speak to you and say hello and how are you? I know what's happened. How are you? And then I just shut up and let him speak. And, you know, I was making him tea and everything. I told my manager, because there's all that goes on, isn't there? And at the end, he said, thank you. I said, you know, I've just listened. He said, no, you're the only one that's spoken to me today and actually addressed the reality of it. He said, I feel bad enough without people ignoring me. Or he said, I get it. It's difficult, but it's so much harder for me. Yep. So, you know, there's something in that. And I think that goes with bereavement, with mental health. And this is the other thing I was going to say earlier, that when you go through something like that, people don't know what to say to you. You know, they said to me, oh, are you over your little problem? And I was like, what? I felt like I could have cried or just thumped somebody in the mouth. Do you know what I mean? Either reaction would have been, or a mixture of both, one before the other. But that was it. And I grew up then in the culture, I don't know what it's like now, that you don't take your problems to work. Well, you are a whole person, and sometimes it's like vice versa. Okay, you're not going to be dwelling on it all day, you've got a job to do, but to be able to say to somebody, look, I'm really not myself today, I'm having problems, this, that, and the other. You know, other people can support you, can carry you for a bit, because we all get those days. But when they, as you said before, when they consistently build up, nobody's noticing, but you haven't got it in you to say either. There's also that element. But if you feel that you haven't got the space to, then you won't. until it becomes too late.
Yeah, there's so much in what you just said there as well, like certainly around the not being able to ask for help. That could be a whole load of reasons why people don't speak up. They could be afraid. They could just think that no one's interested. There's lots of stuff going on in people's head. And so I kind of want to dig into that a little bit as well. And here's the other thing, I know some of the work that you've done with people is around suicide, and that's one of the hashtags that we've been using, like around, this work to attract some people for reaching out to help people really. And lots of these things, including what you talked about with grief, people don't want to have that conversation. It's come up in some of my previous episodes as well, where we've been brought up in a society where nobody wants to hurt the other person or see, or nobody can really handle the other person's tears. They
No.
can't hold that space or that tension of having the other person cry, and they want to fix. You always want to fix the person, kind of thing, rather than allow them to be in that pain. And you actually have to experience the pain because it's part of life. Like, I mean,
Absolutely.
I don't mean that you should be experiencing pain, but if you find yourself in that place, you actually have to go through it, like I did when I went through counseling, and I needed someone to get me through because there wasn't anyone in society that I could talk to that could show me the way, kind of, or that could help me find my way. And people are just exactly what you said, afraid to have conversations when it's about death, loss, grieving, difficult situations that people are in, whatever it might be, abuse. We've got to change that. Like the society, we're humans, we're compassionate, we have the ability to support each other. And this is why I think it's wonderful that it is coming out more at the moment, and equally upset that it's about the pandemic, that these things are starting to be topics that people do talk about, but there's so much further to go.
Absolutely. And that brings to mind two things. The first thing is, I remember some years back now when an auntie who I was very close to died. And I come from a Latin family, so, emotions are normally out. However, having grown up here, it's a different kettle of fish. But when I get into my Latin side, as I call it, that's when the hand chops and, the passion starts and everything. But funnily enough, I've grown up to sort of keep my tears to myself because I'm very independent and have just got used to that. But I remember being at the funeral and I could not stop literally sobbing because it was such a shock and I loved her dearly. And I remember people saying to me, I'm laughing because it's so ridiculous, don't cry. I think, I'm at a funeral. What do you think I am going to do? Now, again, I know that, it is also, well, this is the buzz thing, isn't it? A celebration of somebody's life. But you know what? Somebody's just gone. So for crying out loud, but it was more about them than it was about me, because they couldn't handle. And sometimes, not sometimes, always, I think, when we can't handle something in others, it's because it's in us. So you don't want to show your emotions, and as you say, you want to make everything better and have a cup of tea, and it's like, no, I just need to have a good rant, or hit something so I don't hurt anybody or hurt myself, or just have a good sob. That's how I think. But there was something else that you said. I mean, I too feel very impassioned about making changes, and I think there is so much to do. On LinkedIn, I connect with a lot of people around domestic violence, domestic abuse, trauma, suicide. I myself have been that side of the fence many years ago. And that's one thing I will pride myself on, and I haven't done anywhere near as much as I would like to on it, is to hold that space, because it doesn't frighten me, because it's real. I remember a fellow coach years ago not coming to me, sounds very grand, but calling me and said, Lou, I know we're friends, but I really would like to talk to you because I'm feeling like I don't want to live today. And I'm feeling like I'm in a dangerous place. And, we had about an hour and a half talking on and off. And she said, I feel so different now. She said, just because you've given me the space to just say it and be real about it and own it And as you quite rightly said, you know, you have to feel those feelings, not to live in that place and, you know, take up the accommodation, but just feel it. And, you know, like my incident today, something didn't go right. I could have easily, if I'd wanted to, say, look, I can't make it. I wouldn't have done. But, you know, that's a way I could have gone.
Mm.
And it's not nice. But you know what? It's not the end of the world either.
Yeah.
So it's change. You just change your focus in that moment and look elsewhere, basically.
And that's a really valid point you bring up, that there's so many different possibilities of reactions and responses that people may be experiencing when they're in a situation where it might be traumatic, or they've been through a traumatic situation and they, you know, they haven't been able to articulate or speak to anyone. And so I probably want to just have a little bit of a talk about some of those things that people might experience, really, because for me, when I was in depression, I didn't know I was in depression. And so I was brought up in a farm where there was no downtime. And even, you know, you mentioned at a funeral before where you were told not to cry at a funeral. I remember my father saying to me on the day of the funeral for my mum, you know, you've got to be strong for everyone else here. We're here for them. And as a family, we will deal with this after that, but we have to be strong. And when he was saying, you got to be strong, he's saying, don't cry, you know. And I was doing a eulogy and I held my shit together, you know, and even my husband at the time had said, just treat this like you're delivering a lecture at university,
Oh,
and just look above the back of the tops of the people, don't make eye contact with anyone, and just deliver it like a lecture, you know. So I was put into a place of being a robot to be able to do a job. And so when I got to depression, I found myself like I was running half marathons and over exercising and doing, you know, pushing myself, really punishing myself in that way. And then when I would go to work every day, I'd keep my head down. And I did go to work. I didn't have time off work because I worked for myself. And so I didn't even allow myself to have time off work. I use that as a distraction from my head, my depression, my sadness, my pain, threw myself into work. And at night when I would come home and be home alone, I would fall apart.
yeah.
You know, so people do have really different reactions and responses, and maybe don't even know that they're in a situation where they need help. I even had friends reach out and say, I can get you help in circumstances that I'd been through, kind of thing. And I was like, no, I've got to, you know, have the courage to do this myself, kind of thing. And, you know, I mean, that's something we also need to break, that we are human, and that we
Absolutely.
do have to go through this experience, because when you bottle it up or you block it up like I did, it actually comes out far deeper in a stronger depression than had I moved through it gradually over the years, maybe feeling it and you know, rather resisting it like I was. So what are some of the other reasons and symptoms maybe that people might recognize if they were finding themselves in a situation that they're probably not seeking help?
Well, you know, what comes to mind when you say that instantly, and I think as adults we can do that as well, but certainly with the young people I worked with, I mean, it was more obvious, it was more evident at the time. But taking my own self into it, you know, with, say, the subject of abuse, for instance, and the depression thereafter, a lot of people would associate, or any challenge in adulthood as well, when somebody's in trouble, you know, you can see the ones that are over drinking, they're being loud and brash, and, you know, they're getting into violence, male or female, verbally, physically, whatever it is, you know, bullying. And it happens in the corporate world much more than in the playground, I think, sometimes. And all those more sort of obvious, volatile emotions. But what we mustn't disregard is the quiet way of responding, which is what I did. The good girl, the good boy, the one who accommodates, the one who does what they're told, who doesn't really show much emotion because they want to cry out, but they don't want to be seen to be doing that. So the only way is to just behave. So nobody really notices, but actually they're dying inside. So you know, you get very clever, I certainly did, at wearing a mask. but the chatter that goes on, and as you say, because back then I didn't have the emotional intelligence or the heart, the consciousness to even know what was going on. But I think it happens a lot later on in life as well, because I believe what I've learned through experience and just learning, that sometimes people almost stop at a certain emotional age. So you might get a man who's coming up to 60 who emotionally is still at 14. So that's all going to come out. But of course, it's like, that 14-year-old trying to run your life, your finances, your relation. I mean, it's just not happening.
Mm.
Um, so I think, yeah, it's not forgetting the ones that the people that go into work, for instance. I'm going to use an old term, but who just clock in, clock out, sit at the desk, doing what they have to do, to no particular great level or low level. They just, they're on a straight line. So nobody really notices them. So they wouldn't notice if they weren't there. And they can be in just as much trouble as the ones that are lauding it about and, being everybody's friend and the life and soul of the party. But you can see that they're going through something. So I think it's looking at both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. Basically that's people like sort of hiding in plain sight, isn't it? Like you were talking
Yeah,
about, really, wanting to cry out, like hurting inside, but hiding, and then that's really a withdrawing, isn't it? You've
absolutely.
pulled yourself back in, and you're afraid to ask for help at times like that. There's could be all sorts of reasons why you could be afraid to ask for help, because the consequences of you doing that, and especially if it's in domestic violence circumstances where
Yeah,
reaching out for help might not get you away from that person, but then it might make that person more angry, so you fear doing anything and just take
absolutely.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah. um and other examples are, like you said, hedonism. That's one of the things that I did, these substance abuse, alcohol abuse, running, forcing myself. And then, the financial implication of that as well. I wasn't managing my finances at the time. So you can get into trouble so
mm,
easily when you just fall into situations where you are out of control, but not getting any help from outside. You just, you're just really almost imploding,
absolutely.
destruction.
Yeah, and I heard it said recently, put it in this way, and it's true, as a consequence of that kind of behavior, that people who hurt others are hurting themselves. Now, you can't always condone behavior like that, but generally, I believe anyway, I like to believe that nobody's all one thing. We're all a mixture, and we're all capable of anything in any situation, is my belief.
Hmm.
And we don't even know it half the time, good, bad, or otherwise. Um, but yeah, I think generally, if somebody's being that destructive where they are hurting people a lot, something is going on inside, definitely. But going back to when I worked with young people, because they were a complete box of all sorts, for different problems. And I remember working with this young girl who was so volatile. She was just so crazy, but she was so much in pain inside. And I related to her because my default had always been anger. That's the easiest emotion to go to. But underneath that is a lot of upset, a lot of sadness and fear. So, each emotion can cover up another one. It's whether you allow yourself or allow someone else to take you to the one that you really need to feel in its entirety, which is hard. So for me, it was always anger. And, coming from a Latin family, very passionate and stuff, it was, that was quite the norm, really. But I also think, you know, I'm older than you, but similar kind of era that, it was a culture of children are seen and not heard,
Yep.
and you behave and, you respect your elders. I think now things are changing. So that a lot of youngsters, not all, don't really have that. I don't know quite why that is, but that's another story. But yeah, I think the environment you live in. I remember this residential place I went to when I was really turning a corner, and there were people from other countries and the UK. And it was said then, you know, it depends on the energy of the environment and the era you're brought up in. Like my parents were brought up in the Second World War, and they were evacuated from Gibraltar, where we were born, one side of the family to London, of all places, I mean, the most dangerous, and the other two also London and then Ireland. And so you've got all that around you energetically, you're going to pick that up, whether you're conscious of it or not. So, you know, the times that we grew up in as well is going to have something to do with it, and how people behave. I mean, you know, you've only got to look at what's happening now. And apart from the pandemic, the world's in complete revolt in some respects, but also a lot of things do need to change, I believe.
Yeah, and for me, that's certainly one of the things that I'm hopeful out of this, not just hopeful, actually, that I want to be able to influence to help benefits that we're getting from this situation that we're going through to be maintained. Because, you know, one thing that comes to mind is working from home for people who can do that. Whereas where I've worked in companies before where that was possible, the management never trusted the staff, so they wouldn't allow them to work from home, even though they had the facilities to do so. They wanted them in the office every day. And that's micromanagement. That's not, you know, a nice environment and not a conducive environment to have people wanting to come to work into. And so this has made a huge difference to people not having to travel. Maybe people are not necessarily needing childcare. I know homeschooling and all those things are a massive impact as well. But when you had to go into an office every day and it maybe wasn't necessary, you know, there's a massive impact on the family situation that could have perhaps been alleviated. You know, one of the things that was a huge benefit is that people where we worked, if they had an appointment, they could work from home and they could go to their appointment and, you know, just make up those extra hours for a hospital appointment, a doctor's appointment, rather than take a whole day off on the sick day or whatever it might be to do so. So, you know, there's a benefit there that people are going to get from this, from being able to have it and not having to go in the office 5 days a week. And I do understand that there are people that do need that social interaction and want to be in the office 5 days a week. So it doesn't fit everyone. And maybe that's where the flexibility comes in, because, you know, mental health for people as well, it affects people differently. It affects people at different times in their lives, and it affects people as a result of different circumstances. It's not just like mental health is this label and that's and it's those people over there. It's not, you know, all of us sort of thing. It's like it does actually touch everyone.
I agree. And, you know, you saying not them over there. I mean, I felt that sort of reaction, even from friends of mine, to be honest with you. And in some circumstances, it's moving away from old circles, because it can be just like a dysfunctional family. And when you don't want to fit that role anymore, you don't want to take that space. It's like, you know, a pull and push to get away. It's not like you have to have this massive argument and we're not friends anymore kind of situation, but you outgrow parts of yourself, as well as you know, the people around you, again, the culture, you know, working with energy, that all affects. And you're absolutely right. I mean, this thing about, oh yes, well, she's that kind of person, or he's the sort of person it would happen to, I mean, that's just utter rubbish. And what people forget is that the mind is everything, in my opinion. And I'm learning that more and more now with different personal development I do. And obviously you've got to listen to your body, but you know, think about what you think about and mind your mind, because that rules or governs everything. I know we work with the heart as well, but you know, the mind, the thinking. And I've forgotten what I was going to say now. No, it's gone, Mass. It'll come back in a minute.
Yeah, it will. But
oh,
you were
yes,
talking
saying about, sorry, I was just going to finish that about them over there. And what people forget is that when the things of the mind, if they don't come out in you in mental imbalance, I don't hate the word mental, but emotional mental imbalance challenges, it will come out somehow in physical challenges. So if people are constantly having problems in their body, that somehow is okay. But actually, it's just coming out through a different hole, through a different avenue. And that's not healthy either. Not at
No.
all.
No, you're right. And that's something that I do want to come onto, because I know you do like core transformational work with energy, and an emotion is energy, isn't it? An emotion is an energy that's moving through us. And if I just take it back to a sort of simpler example that I think I used when I had Stuart on, when we talk to someone about something like, you know, you mentioned that man in the office who had lost his sister-in-law, I think you said,
Yes.
quickly. So when people know that, the energy rises up in the person, like, so if I know that about you, and then I'm like, oh, I'm worried about that, so I want to bring, my energy's risen up, I want to bring it back to neutral, so I don't have this problem that you've just kind of alerted me to anymore, so it doesn't, it's something I want to push away or get rid of, kind of thing. So that's why I try to fix you. And in the same way, when you talk about like emotions, and they move, their energy in motion, emotions are energy in motion, yeah, so the energy has to move through your body. And I'm like, I know you do a lot of work in corporate as well, so do you want to just like talk to that about how beneficial movement and energy is to people around helping them process some
Absolutely.
of
Yeah.
the emotions?
And, you know, I think a lot more people are familiar with yoga these days and Pilates. And I think it's just either a misunderstanding or no understanding about Tai Chi and Qigong. And I went through yoga. I've always been a very physical person as well in sport. And like you, I can relate to going through phases where exercise was like a big obsession of mine. And then I realized I too was punishing myself, because there's a big driver in me. So I will always, you know, a lot of discipline, but it can go over over the edge and down the other side if I'm not careful. So movement's always been important, but I'll just start from here. I remember when I first was introduced to yoga, I hated it because it was so slow. I stayed with it because I knew it was what I needed, because everything else was just aerobics and running here and going there. Oh, I'll walk 40 minutes instead of, you know, crazy. But so I stayed with it, and I was asked to become a teacher, but my confidence wasn't where it needed to be then. So I thought, no. I had this belief that people were just pacifying me. It wasn't really, it was nonsense, but that's where I was. And then I came across Tai Chi first, because I'd always been fascinated by the Eastern way and the martial side. And I don't know, just that energy, really, that quiet energy, quiet, but very knowing, very strong, very serene. And I loved it. And then years down the line, came on to Qigong. Now, to answer your question, it's very important, because even if you don't understand it, the movements are clearing energy. So when we get stale or stuck energy, and you know, our bodies become tight, it's because our energy's like tight. So to explain that better, you know, like when we're cold, it's a natural thing to close your fist. But when we're tense and stressed, a lot of people will do that. Now, if you continuously do that, the energy flow is gone, because it's just stuck there. So all that negativity just keep going around your body. So actually what you want to do is just open and let it go. There's a lot of shaking and a fluttering and different things that we do. But Qigong especially was created by the Chinese about 1800 years plus, because they wanted to maintain their good health and longevity. And so they took their knowledge of Chinese medicine and acupuncture points, etc., and viewed how animals moved and how they healed. And they brought all that together, and that's how Qigong was created. Tai Chi is a different beast because it's martial based, so used for fighting, although I teach it for health. Some martial artists will shout me down on that, and it's martial and that's it, but it can teach you so much. Self-awareness, you know, the coordination is fantastic, because you're using left side of the body, right side of the body. So cognitively as well, it helps enormously. And you can't possibly be thinking all those thoughts that we think when you're doing something like that. Because like it or not, although eventually becomes a flow and you go with the energy, you've got to think about what you're doing. And you're working left, right, backwards, forwards, the arms bending. I tell you, I'm 58 now and I can move my body in ways that I don't think I even did in my 20s.
Yeah.
With the flexibility it's helped me create. And the way I can describe it is when I'm feeling especially what I call discombobulated, but any time, it's like I've given myself a wash from the inside out. And I believe that to be true from the people I've learnt with, the people I study with now, because you're just letting the energy flow and go where it needs to go. And for me, I love those two art forms over and above. I mean, I'll do all sorts of things as well, dancing. I love walking, doing things on YouTube here while you're in lockdown, because I've started this early morning thing and, you get up and do some exercise. So I'll mix it up. But those two are my go-tos, in particular Qigong, because it is so good for the body. And in these art forms, you're also working with the internal organs. So you're increasing the health of your liver, kidneys, heart, spleen, lungs, but also, especially now, improving the health of the immune system.
Yeah. Amazing. And something that people might be able to, if they haven't really got into that sort of energy movement through qigong or even any other form of energy movement, if you think about, if you get to a point where you feel really angry and then you do want to hit something, that's an explosive action to move that power, that force out of your body. It's the same as
Absolutely.
if you're angry and you want to go for a run to calm yourself down, and there's a few things going on there as well. I think if you're running and it's outdoors, because obviously you can run on a treadmill as well, which is probably a little bit different in what you get. Well, certainly I feel different on a treadmill to when I'm running outdoors. But I remember when I was going to counseling and I was going through that depression, that one of the counselors told me years ago that being under the open sky when you're having those intense emotions is easier for you to allow them to continue to go through and not hold on to them and stop them. You can let them, you let them run their course almost, like while it's
Yeah.
going through your body. And I suppose if you sort of think about that, like if you're in your house, you're in your flat, you've got a small roof and closed doors, you feel very confined. And so that's happening in your mind and your mental state. But when you get outside and you open up, you can open yourself up. So if you do go for a run, you can, move that energy that's been tightly kind of holding you in stress indoors. You can move you through. That's why people are suggesting just go for a walk, even if it's 5 minutes, just to get started. That's why people, say for mental health, try to do some movements that will, help you, because it does allow your mind to have a rest, because that mind just ticking over continually on the negative thoughts is just devastating to you.
Absolutely. And even as I say, because I've taken to waking up very early and the first 20 minutes doing some sort of exercise. And I have absolutely been loving, not every day, I do different things, but going out, I did it this morning for a really early morning walk. And, I don't know if you've noticed of late, the moon has been terrific. And the other morning, it was like it was guiding me. I was in complete fantasy world. And believe me, I was so tired. I was like, oh, God, here we go again. And I got all warmed up and went out. And it was like Mr. Moon was there with me. But, my senses have become more enhanced because the birds are tweeting. I'm fascinated by who's up and who isn't, whose lights are on and who aren't, how many cars. So my mind's just gone somewhere else. And I feel like I'm connected to something outside of myself. So and when I look back on my journey, obviously hindsight's a beautiful thing. If I knew then what I know now, but when I had a spell in hospital, and one of the treatments, if you like, was, I suppose, what you'd call now occupational therapy. But we did baking, we did gardening, cooking, cleaning, anything to engage the body as well as the mind and take us away from what was going on up there. Now, even if it is, because there's a difference, clinical depression, and some people will say I'm depressed when they're just fed up. And, you know, that also has to change, because I think that's where some of the stigma comes from. Well, I get depressed, but look at me, I can cope.
Yeah.
Believe in, you know, and if you share the same view, but you know, when you're really, really depressed, it's a different ball game altogether, and you can't get out of bed, and you feel like you're going mad, and all the rest of it. And for some part, maybe you have, you know, that is very, very different. So even if it's just for 1 minute that your state changes,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's just having the patience and having somebody with you, or not, you know, literally, but knowing that you're supported. I mean, in the past, I've rang the Samaritans and everything in my life, because I would do what I needed to do. And if there was nobody around me, these places are fantastic, because they will just listen. And that's all you need, is an outpouring. Writing is also something I've used a great deal of. Just journal, just write it all out. Nobody needs to see it. You don't even need to see it again. It doesn't need to be censored. You can write down all your horrible thoughts, all your vengeful thoughts, anything that comes out. And then after a while, it would just be like, whew, just left them on the paper.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So there are little things that you can do to get a little bit of relief, because, you know, we're not talking about that we can solve problems for people that are in circumstances like that rapidly.
No.
But you know, 1 minute of peace from your mind sometimes is just the starting point. And if
Mm,
that means you go for a 5-minute walk and then you have to go back home because you've had some sort of anxiety, then that's cool. But that
mm,
1 minute today will allow you to have another opportunity to make another minute tomorrow, and then just take smaller kind of incremental steps in that you can change the possibilities that you're experiencing. Like, you know, that you're absolutely right. You need someone to talk to. You need to articulate what's going on, because sometimes when you speak about it, you go, oh, I didn't realize that that was all in me.
absolutely, absolutely. And you just, it's almost like what's coming to mind when you say that. It's a bit like decluttering your home. It makes space for something else, or just for empty space, just for the sake of space, because we all need it. And whoever it is that you talk to, or as I say, journaling, you know, whatever, even if you're scared to go out and have that walk, you know, especially these days, if you're lucky enough to have a computer, or you can access videos on your phone, you could dance around like a mad person at home on your own, you know, do whatever it is that you want to do. So, but it certainly has to be, in my view, a mixture of the physical and the mind stuff, you know, the thinking and the movement. And, you know, whichever way people go, whatever their beliefs are, I say the word spirit, but one's natural essence, you know, that you connect to. I'm not going to say something else because it's not for everybody, but you know, if it's not God, if it's not the fairies, if it's not the universe, the angels, Mother Nature,
Yeah.
go out and talk to the trees or whatever, you know. I mean, all that coming from a place of working with, I love trees and and greenery and nature. And there's a lot to be drawn from green spaces, from open spaces, the birds, that, as I say, it just wakes you up. All your senses come alive.
Yeah. Yes. You're so right. And you know, I just we are coming up sort of to time almost, and just a few things to sort of finish off really. We are going to put Lou's contact details here for you if you'd like to have a conversation with Lou. At any time you can reach out to her through what's the best place for them to reach you? Is that going to be via your Facebook page?
It could be probably LinkedIn, actually. Well,
Okay.
LinkedIn or Facebook, because I know not everybody uses LinkedIn, but either my personal Facebook page, they can message me there, or through LinkedIn as well.
Okay, I'll make sure that those correct details are up there, because I know I've been putting details up and I didn't check in with you which are the best
Oh,
routes.
no, that's fine. That's
um,
fine. I can leave you an email address as well, and you can put that up. So either
yeah,
of those three avenues.
yeah. And so just and thanks so much for this conversation, because
Thank you.
conversations like these are really going to help people and help us be able to change the way people's in the society are responding to one another, and
Mm.
even the reactions and the stigmas that are out there that we can change. And I know you've talked a little bit about the work that you do, and we've covered a bit about the problems, but what would you say as a sort of takeaway or a final summary for people who are struggling in any of the traumatic or any other circumstances, that that's the sort of first steps to do, apart from reaching out to you, obviously?
Yeah, no, I mean, firstly, I would say, and I know this is also said a lot, but really with deep heart and passion, is never give up, no matter how tough things get. Because I was at that point twice in my life, and I'm so glad that I didn't. And it was hard, and I think it's that as well. It's not being negative here, but it is a tough thing to experience. And I think accepting that, I think my biggest thing would be, yes, never give up, but also the other side of that is do whatever you have to do to get yourself through. Now, whether that be, I'm not a big advocate of tablets. I had medication years ago and everything, and I think too many people still are on them, and half the time they don't do much good, and people just want a quick fix. I don't think there is such a thing.
No.
However, they can get you through a really in the short term, a really difficult period, to bring you up to a point where you can be receptive to other things. And I'm not a medical practitioner, but that's my belief and experience. So do whatever it is, try anything, obviously, that's not going to hurt you. So whether that be, talking therapy, movement, a mixture of both, because something or some things will work. And I learned a lot through my journey, like I say, in the hospital, doing these therapeutic things. And that's how we all really, what we use those things for. But when your life's at stake, literally, it doesn't feel that way. But it's exercising those muscles. Reach out and try anything, but never ever give up, because yeah, that's my parting thing, really. It's just never give up. There's always a way. I think that's what I'm trying to say. There
Yeah,
is always a way. And if you can really start working with this, then that's going to change everything. The mind is truly, my belief, is what you think about, you bring about.
yeah, for sure. And until you start to notice what's going on and have a chance to pause and stop yourself, stop those thoughts in their tracks, kind of thing, they just keep running your life, kind of thing. So it's
Yeah,
important to
and
notice them.
absolutely. And just one more thing, I think, is learning that it's not it meant as an attack, like it's always them and not me. But when you come across people in your life, albeit loved ones as well, people close, who don't want to go there, who don't respond to you in the way you need, and sometimes you don't even know what you need in those circumstances,
Mm.
don't think it's you. It's their reaction, it's their stuff. It obviously, it's got something to do with you, because there's that connection. It's a two-way thing. But don't let that put you off doing anything about it, because your life is the most important life. And I remember I'll just leave you with this. I remember working with a young lady who was in an awful state, and she tested me to the hilt. I won't go into how, but she did, and just to see if I cared. And she took a huge overdose, and she rang me, and I couldn't get to where she was because it was too far. So my boss at the time supported me in getting her through on the phone, which thankfully she did survive. And they said it was a very heavy overdose. She was very lucky. And she didn't want her mum to go to the hospital, so I had the task of telling her mum that really directly, because it would have cost her daughter's life. And I used to question my validity and my value in what I did. And my manager at the time said, you know, if you hadn't have been in her life, she might not have had somebody to reach out to. So you never know where that person's going to come from. But at the end, she wrote me a card, and I've never forgotten her words. She said, "Thank you, Lou. You helped me realize that my life was worth something." So find somebody, use the Samaritans, use this, use that, use whatever is available, because something will stick, something will work. And you'll learn a lot along the way too.
Yeah. And there are possibilities, and as we are
Absolutely.
resilient, we do have a survival instinct. So there is help. You're absolutely right. Thank you so much, Lou. What a
Thank you.
fantastic episode we've had here tonight. And I really do appreciate that all the work that you do to help people here in this space. So hopefully I can help some of your people through this, getting some messages out and getting them to contact you.
Thank you, Maz. It's been a pleasure and lovely to connect with you again.
Lovely.
Take care.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.